The year was 150 after civilization. After the war between Ikalga and the Primordial Alliance, aka the Orange Alliance, has concluded, the political landscape of Aludia and Zucaria as a whole has changed drastically. To start off with, both Vagzash and Wotan have collapsed. Wotan has collapsed into three independent states of Braus, Gerest, and Ires. Ires being the vassal state of Gerest. And Vagzash has collapsed into Hapotica, as well as some of Vagzash's land has basically rebelled away from Vagzash and has joined Wotan instead. As of now, this region over here, in southern Aludia, is perhaps the most disunited region in the world. However, all of this would change as the famous explorer of Kronos has discovered something previously unseen in this world, and that unseen is knowledge. Kronos by accident discovers that instead of infusing copper and tin, you could actually infuse copper and iron. Now this would come in handy as iron was so much more abundant than tin in this world, and in our world actually. And because of this, Kronos has discovered the Iron Age. And with this knowledge, Kronos has embarked on a treacherous journey all the way back to Hapotica. And that treacherous journey involved just remembering where the hell he came from, which eventually he does succeed and he finds himself in this little city over here. Once there, Kronos has officially kick-started the Iron Age for one of the civilizations in this godforsaken world. How this will play out for this world is still a mystery, however we are going to see it now. Hello and welcome, and this is What If Civilization Started Over Again in Another World, and this is episode 6. Now, that entry dialogue did give you some knowledge of what happened in the previous episode, but I still highly encourage you to go and watch the previous episode, as it is going to go more into the details of how the Ikalga and the Primordial Alliance War has happened, and why the map ended up looking like this. So to start off this episode with, we will have to set the scene, and we're going to do that by exploring the consequences of the Ikalgan Primordial Alliance War. After the war between Ikalga and the Orange Alliance has concluded, many nations like Ires, Braus, Squeds, and particularly Gerest felt cheated from this war, as they have gained absolutely nothing. In fact, the whole Orange Alliance actually lost territories rather than gain it, with the only members that gained territory being Untas and Enact. And as soon as Ikalga has started to lose, the Orange Alliance just signed a peace treaty, even when Himala, Yeti, Ostver, and so many more nations have actually joined the Orange Alliance cause to fight Ikalga. This was because they thought they could win against Ikalga, and to a certain point they were kind of right. Ikalga wasn't in the best shape to fight all of Himala, Yeti, and Ostver at the same time. In fact, things got so heated that there was a formal meeting, which has turned into a spectacular farce. But I can say that specific conference has led to the division of the Orange Alliance, and that resulted in Squets, Gerest, Braus, and Ires to form their own alliance, the Aludian Alliance. By the way, if you didn't know, Aludia is just all of this region over here. And this is safe to say that this has made the Orange Alliance and the Aludian Alliance really weak, at least compared to Ikalga. Speaking of which, Ikalga has gotten a lot of territories. Well, not too much, just these ones over here. But they still have to assimilate and integrate these regions to at least not be really rebellious against Ikalga. However, while that was happening and Ikalga was still assimilating these territories, their armies were still relatively close to Vagzash. And seeing what happened to Vagzash and how utterly defenseless and pathetic they looked, they've just decided to quickly do a 20-minute adventure in and out. They would start off by first surprising Vagzash, as they have crossed this river over here into the city and relatively easily capturing the city, and just taking more and more land over here. And eventually it's gotten to a point where Vagzash's capital was being threatened by Ikalga, and it was at that point that they have decided to surrender. And this was the peace treaty. Vagzash didn't lose any land, however they became tributary states to Ikalga just like Hiktu and this nation over here. Speaking of this nation, they have gotten a name, and that name is Valch. Now, a bit random, but if I would have to make a power ranking of all these countries, then Ikalga would definitely be the first. Now, moving away from Aludia into Inner Zucaria, we can see these 5 nations, and they have been doing some exploring, more specifically over these rivers over here. And that exploring takes place in about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and in the year 152, the 8 other lands that they have currently explored. However, these nations didn't just explore for nothing, they wanted to expand, as their population was booming. And this would be the amount of colonization that they would do. And now they have names. So the first one is Vitebska, second one is Kna, the third one is Ir, the fourth one is Nalister, and the fifth one is Falbit. And now we can see 3 worlds, actually no, 4 worlds including Emptorium, emerging. This being this one over here, the main one over here, and this little colony of Ikalga, Valch. Now relationships between Vitebska, Kna, Ir, and Nalister and Falbit would be pretty warm at first. However, as time would pass by, the relationships would get less and less warm, and eventually they became actually cold and hostile. And this would eventually lead to a war. And the first war would be between Falbit and Nalister. Tensions between these two were so high that even a small border dispute right over here would be enough to set them off and go to war with each other. The conflict started off pretty successfully for Falbit, with them even starting to capture a lot of land across the river. However, their war efforts came to a halt when they've hit this city, because there was a lot of fortifications on this line over here. However, Nalister forgot to account for one thing. This is quite literally open terrain, which could be really easily circumnavigated, and so that has happened. Falbit invaded from this side completely for some reason, bewildering Nailster, and because of this city had to basically be abandoned in order not to get encircled by the Falbit forces. However, even that didn't help. Around 50% or more, to be honest, of Nailster forces were encircled and either taken as prisoners of war or executed, sadly, by Falbit. This has prompted Nailster and Ir to unite into one single country. With Ir now owning this country, they could sign a peace treaty with Falbit, as it was not in their interest to fight a war with someone that they basically didn't know existed before they've united with Nailster. So the peace treaty between Ir and Falbit looked something like this. As to not fully humiliate Nailster and actually make Ir consider a peace treaty with Falbit, Falbit has abstained from taking the capital of Nailster, which was considered a huge win for both Nailster and Ir. Moving to the south of Eludia, the Hapotican leader has received news that Kronos is within their lands and he wants to meet the Hapotican leader. And he agrees to meet with Kronos. After around 7 hours or so, it was a really long meeting between Kronos and the Hapotican ruler. Kronos has given the secret of the Iron Age to the Hapotican leader, and that was iron. It's in the name. With that knowledge, the Hapotican blacksmiths have begun to construct better swords which are more durable than bronze swords, better instruments for making those swords which are going to last longer and are just generally going to be more tough, and so much more. And as a consequence of that iron, actually minting coins became a thing, which has essentially revolutionized the Hapotican economy, making it much more robust. Moving away from the Hapotican economy, because Kronos went to Hapotica, he actually told Hapotican rulership what was happening in these faraway lands, which gave Hapotica about this much insight as to how much territories there were beyond this point. And all of these riches could be theirs, if only they would just stop Whatif from expanding into this direction. And that's what they started to do. Because there was a major city already over here, they have just started to expand from it, and alongside this river over here. Obviously Whatif saw this, and started to expand on their own over here, as to not let Hapotica expand even more into this zone over here. If only they would know that that was not Hapotica's main goal. So they would start expanding over here, and on the border with Braus. Braus saw that as well, and they started to expand as well, which basically started a somewhat of a colonial frenzy. Eventually, after all of that was over, from the borders that looked somewhat like this, it moved all the way to these borders. Whatif even made a city over here to consolidate their claims over this area. However, Hapotica did not like that, not the slightest. And that gave them the perfect excuse to test out their newly forged weaponry. And so the Whatif-Hapotican War began. To start off with, Hapotica just started invading this city over here, and eventually they did get it, relatively easily, because Whatif, unlike Hapotica, did not expect that someone would actually go to war over these claims. Next up, Hapotica started bashing the Whatif defenses over here, even nearly reaching the city, until the Wotan army has finally scrambled and showed up to fight the Hapotican army. And so the battle of this city has commenced, and with Hapotica being outnumbered with 2-1, they actually won, which was quite impressive. And this was due to multiple factors. For example, that the Hapotican army just had better equipment than the Wotan army, and that the Hapotican army actually was somehow more trained than the Wotan army. That's quite impressive, to be honest. But oh well, Hapotica didn't really want to make this a full-blown out conflict to fully conquer or like subjugate Wotan. They just wanted to test out their weaponry that they forged recently. And so there was a peace treaty between Hapotica and Wotan. And this was the peace treaty. Nothing much has changed except that this city over here that Wotan has established would just go to Hapotica as compensation. And now Hapotica was fully able to expand into the west. And this would look like something like this. This was achieved in around 7.5 years, and this even led to the establishment of 4 new important cities for Hapotica. However, because they didn't have much population to begin with, they just couldn't expand that much, and so these important cities were relatively desolate and didn't have much people in them. Just like the rest of Hapotica, to be honest. And for this video, this is the conclusion of what happens in Hapotica and generally in this region as a whole. Taking a look again at the Maros Sea and at the Orange Alliance as a whole, we can see that Latros has suffered a lot in this war. More specifically, they have lost one of their important cities and generally the last holdout on the continent of Aludia, which leaves them really vulnerable on this one little island. So a decision is made to unify Latros and Untas into one single nation, and thus the first nation is no more. Well, not no more, but they just exist under Untas now. It's a miracle they even managed to exist for so long without being taken over or something else. Oh, by the way, remember how I said in the last video that Himala is basically on the brink of collapse with their logistical nightmares governing this big nation over here? Well, it's about to happen. All it took was one corrupt government official to declare his own country, and that country was the country of Keln. However, this didn't just happen in Himala, it also happened in Yeti. This was because Keln wasn't actually a country, it was more like a region. And this region spanned roughly about these areas in both Yeti and Himala. And because of this, these regions over here have decided to join Keln in their uprising against Himala and now Yeti as well. And surprisingly, Yeti was actually cool with the Keln uprising and they even gave them the lands that they wanted. However, Himala, they have lost roughly around 40% of their country, so they wouldn't just let Keln have their independence without a fight. So the first Keln-Himalan war has started. Many in Himala were actually opposed, especially the people in the north over here and in the really south over here. These people were opposed as they wanted to kind of form their own government to fight against the Ikalgan spread, which has started with this little colony being invaded. However, over here, these people are actually not that opposed to Keln themselves because, as I said before, Keln's realm was around over here-ish. It was kind of mixed. But all you have to know is that these people over here didn't want to fight Keln. And because of that, Keln actually managed to kind of push Himala's army around, with them being actually on their way to grabbing this important city over here. However, that was stopped shortly after the Himalayan reinforcements actually arrived in this area, and so Keln's army was pushed all the way up to this important city. However, that was not for long, as remember the people in the north who wanted to make their own country? Yeah, they were about to rebel away, and Himala knew about it because they have gotten some confirmation of that, which led to them signing a peace treaty with Keln in order to kind of stop this uprising over here. And so these were the borders with Keln and Himala for now. And this was it for this region in general for this episode. Now we're going to start taking a look at the Aptorium and what they were up to. But it's actually not that bad, they didn't explore that much this time. How do you even manage to explore this much in 8 years? And to think that they would stop exploring this much, especially around the rivers. I mean, at least they found some plains, but still, that's a little bit too much of exploration, don't you think that? Anyways, not only did they explore this much over here, but they've also set up some colonies. Yeah, this is just insane. I cannot lie. How are the people even allowing this? What kind of Stockholm syndrome is this that they're actually going and living in these lands? Like seriously, they're basically being deported from... I'm not even gonna question this anymore. This is just a joke nation. You have to ponder sometimes when enough is enough, and I think the Aptorian king just didn't do that. Speaking of the Aptorian king, he died. The Aptorian king is dead, and now instead of the Aptorian king ruling the nation, It's the Aptorian queen, because the son of the king is way too young to rule the nation. He's only around 9. And anyways, all hail Aptorium. I don't know what else to say about this. Now, this is the last part of the video. We are going to check what is happening in Valch, and they actually have expanded. Valch has started to explore the coastlines over here in the west, and eventually they hit this little patch of savanna all the way up here in the north. Well, it was not Valch, but it was just Icalga with Valch. Mostly Icalga, but still. And because they found such a good space for colonization and setting up a colony, they thought about why not settling a colony there. And so that happened. For now, the colony's borders are somewhat arbitrary, but later they would become more pronounced and even maybe, just maybe, be able to link up through this vast desert to actual Valch. But that's just a maybe. However, when the Icalgan explorers left, the Valch explorers actually wanted to go further into this desert. Having some resupplies from this already established colony, they have started to venture in further into the desert, following the coastlines. However, an accident has occurred, and they have been led to these lands over here, and they have explored it. Thankfully, it was a savanna, so because of that, they have actually told Valch, or should I say this little colony over here that was Valch affiliated, about these lands over here, just over the strait. And because of that, Valch has established a new colony on what they thought to be just a little island. Little would they know that they actually just discovered a whole new landmass, a whole new continent, and they would call it Akashi. And this concludes this episode. However, at the end there's always the cultural map, so if you're interested in that, then you can check it out. And as of now, this is the cultural map of the world. To start off with, we can actually notice that there are multiple cultures now inside of the Aptorium, with obviously this being the main Aptorium culture, but this here is a new culture. This culture is mostly the Aptorium culture. However, now, because it's been so much time since the Aptorium has actually seen the old world, which has changed drastically after they left, because of it, there's a new culture now, which believes in that the new world is the only world and that the old world has basically died out, or something along those lines. Now, going to the old world. And to make our lives easier, I'll just probably remove the world layer, so it's just only the culture layer. And now we're going to address the elephant in the room. What is Icalga doing? Where do I even begin? So after the war between the Orange Alliance and Icalga, and after Vakzash became a vassal state of Icalga, Icalga has started enforcing their culture on the newly acquired territories and their vassal state of Vakzash. This could be seen in these border territories being now Icalgan culture, and as well as this city over here now being Icalgan culture as well. Same over here and over here. Another major change that has happened in the cultures of this world is the creation of the Kelm culture. This was before a subculture, but now it actually has become a main culture in some of these regions. And finally, the last semi-important change to this cultural map was the distinction between the Himalayan culture and these two cultures over here. This bluish culture is called the Vitebska culture, and this yellowish culture is called the Falbit culture, respectively for their nations. And this was it for this video. Now, if you enjoyed the content that I'm currently making, you can always subscribe to my channel and like this video in order to show support for my content. And this was Atoxi Mapping, and goodbye.